Labdien, labdien, cienījamās dāmas, godātie kungi.
Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. Happy to welcome so many of you to our today's discussion. And this is the fifth sentiment index that we are presenting. It has raised a lot of interest among you, and I'm very happy that so many of you have managed to come to this discussion. So today we'll take a look whether our competitiveness has increased over the past 12 months and whether the investment climate has improved and whether we are facing a rise or a fall. We'll take a stock of what has been achieved over the past 12 months, and we will also try to identify the areas in which we should intensify our efforts. And this survey has been compiled by the FICIL together with the Stockholm School of Economics in Riga. 2019 was full of different developments. We got new government, there's an overhaul in the financial sector, and a wider discussion has started, and finally I'm happy to say that we have started a launched discussion on the governance in higher education. We have zero tax rate on reinvested profit, and entrepreneurs have also been very supportive of the President and the Prime Minister, and we'll see what their assessment is. But there were several buts last year. The availability of a workforce unfortunately shows that we're in a crisis, and demographics also shows that we're in a crisis, and also fair competition is one of the problems. And next year ahead of us will also be very interesting, very powerful in terms of various developments, and let's see whether we'll be able to use this year as a springboard to become more attractive for foreign direct investment at the Baltic Sea region level. Would like to thank Anders Sauka for this, compiling this survey, for compiling this research. Would like to also thank FICIL board, who conducted interviews, and altogether we had 47 different interviews. Would like to thank the investors for answering the questions, and they frankly shared their opinion and their assessment, and thank you for that. And would like to also urge all the investors in the room today to not be shy and answer all the questions that you have, questions about how to make our investment climate better, and would like to thank the US and Norwegian Embassy for supporting this event as well. We have a lot of issues to cover, and I would like to now hand the moderation over to Jānis Dombrs, a well-known Latvian journalist. So thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you. And briefly about the rules of procedure, the format, and the participants, some housekeeping remarks and rules. This is a continuation of the discussion that we had a year ago. Last year we had representatives of 7 political groups that were elected into the parliament. The government wasn't formed yet, and they were saying that, you know, you have to wait for a while for a good government to be formed, and Mr. Asherin is not here, but we will have also him and the representatives of other 4 political parties that are in the coalition as well, because the Foreign Investment Council met with the government in spring. There was a high-level meeting, and now we are basically taking a stock of the progress of the implementation of those position papers or recommendations. We'll have the ruling parties, and Mr. Asherin, you will join the panel in a brief while, but that doesn't mean that we are limited to these 5 speakers. We'll have an open discussion. On one side we have various members of FICIL, various CEOs of enterprises that are members of the FICIL, and on the other side we have representatives of different government agencies and government institutions that are either responsible or, you know, a part of this index. So we will have an open discussion. We'll of course open the floor for questions if we'll have time. So we'll have an open discussion, but we will divide it into different themes. Human resources, legislation, rule of law will be the main sort of themes that we will cover. And now I'd like to give the floor to the author of the study, or the survey, Anders Sauka, for the presentation of the research. Thank you, Jānis. Dear investors, dear entrepreneurs, dear policymakers, dear colleagues, friends, I think that everyone in this room is very well aware of what kind of impact good foreign direct investment has on our economy, and that's why almost or virtually any development-oriented country is competing for the foreign direct investment, and Baltic countries are no exception in this regard. And if we are competing for foreign direct investment, it's worth also taking a look at what our investment climate is. So this is how we compare to Lithuania and Estonia. Latvia is in red, and we are not comparing ourselves to Germany, United States, or the United Kingdom, which would make such a comparison much more complicated, with rather comparing ourselves to neighboring countries. And if we, look back 2 years back compared to Lithuania and Estonia, our ability to attract investment has been lower compared to our neighboring countries. So in terms of investment flowing in, we are performing below our neighboring countries, so there's a lot of room of improvement when it comes to figures or indicators. Nevertheless, the role or the importance of the foreign investors is very big in our economy, and they are much more productive compared to local economies, economic operators. And 1/7 of all the business community is responsible for the biggest share of tax, more than 1/3 of tax. So quite impressive figures. And to find out how the investors that are present in Latvia are feeling, we are conducting the survey. This is the 5th survey, or the 5th year that we've been conducting the survey, and we all approached 50 biggest investors in Latvia. I think these are well-known brands to everyone. You do recognize them, and of course each investor's views are worth taking into consideration, because these are flagship companies, industry leaders. Nevertheless, this is a sort of a consolidated opinion of the foreign investors that we are presenting to you today, although each of them have considerably important things to say. And what they are saying is that the investment climate slowly but gradually is getting better. The average evaluation on the scale of 1 to 5 is 2.6. And foreign investors are a bit more positive about what government has done over the past 12 months. So their feedback with regard to the government's efforts to improve the investment or business climate is more positive. Over the last 5 years, since we've been compiling the index, it's the first time that I'm seeing such a positive evaluation or assessment of the government work, and specifically Prime Minister's work has been evaluated very positively, and you will see that from different quotes or from different statements, and which is very good, and which sets this index apart from the previous 4 years' indexes. And compared to the previous indexes, indices, investors are all starting to consider further investments. So 47 out of the surveyed investors said that they are planning further investment in Latvia, which is a good signal. That does not necessarily mean that they are saying that we have perfect investment climate, we have no improvements there, but the trend has changed, so they are a bit more positive about investment opportunities here. At the top, you see the main challenges according to the investors, which have not been raised for the first time, where we have low scores, and also the progress is a lot slower in terms of improving these indicators. So the more red you see, the less progress has happened. So demographics, availability of workforce, quality of education, science, healthcare, and so on and so forth. At the bottom we have problem issues or challenges that have been identified by foreign investors. However, contrary to the top sort of line, these are the areas in which there has been more significant progress achieved. And some of the circles are almost sort of without any red and are mostly grey, which is a good sign. So these are issues that, say, 4 or 5 years ago or a couple of years ago were very poorly evaluated. And this time around we decided to focus on 4 areas identified as the problematic areas by the foreign investors and other stakeholders, policy makers, media last year in 2019. So it's the tax system, financial sector, higher education and productivity. So 4 main themes, 4 main areas, and there are different statements or characteristics given by the investors, and I hope that politicians will study the survey or research much more carefully. It has been published as a leaflet and will be available on SSE Riga webpage. We'll find out more about what the investors think, and this is what we are going to discuss further with our today's participants. So this is where I would like to stop and pass it over to the moderator, Jan. So thank you, Anders Sauke. He's also open to questions and comments, but let's keep it, compact, and it seems that KPV.LV are facing a major turmoil and they have probably missed the invitation. So the question to the politicians, looking at the evaluation, this is probably what pleases you, but this is within the sort of the permissible deviation. And if we look at this, and if we also read the government declaration, it says to achieve the best business climate in the Baltic countries. So the question is, why are you failing to attract more investment? Give us, in a couple of sentences, your opinion. Do you agree with such an evaluation, or do you think that it is wrong? Yes, we can start with you, Mr. Pavlets. And yes, we can go around the sort of clock. And if we would have Mr. Zakatistov, then we would have the small coalition, the 5 parties that are in the government, in the parliament. Unfortunately, Mr. Zakatistov has, his internal party meeting and he is busy. So you are trying to defend him. So it seems that you have a very united coalition. But, to keep it on a serious note, there are some improvements that we can see from this index, and this sentiment is very important, very descriptive. And what I like is, those hard figures. We have the lowest foreign investment, and in terms of GDP, our GDP growth is slow compared to our neighboring countries. So these are, hard facts, and it reflects, the economic trends that we have been seeing for a while. These problems that have been identified are not new, and I, in a brief moment, will also mention what government has done to address these issues or these problems. But what is missing? Why aren't indicators going up? Well, 1 year is not enough to achieve any significant progress. These problem areas are the areas in which we have achieved the most change, the quicker response, fighting oligarchs, that's something that we have done in the past year. But the problem is that, unfortunately, there are a lot of quarrels between the coalition parties, and still, there's a lot of, pre-election rhetoric going on. Mr. Eglitz. Yes, next week we will celebrate 1 year of this government, and it took us a lot of time to form the government, and we almost set a record for forming the government, and we competed in this regard with Sweden, if you will. But the good news is that 5 parties are in the coalition, and we are working in coalition, and we have managed to get some decisions passed, and the Prime Minister is capable of holding the coalition together. together. As far as decisions go, we have a president who is now... But what about the evaluation of the investors? Well, my first reaction is that we had, major changes happening in the financial sector, but the improvements are not there. Well, yes, financial sector, of course, has had an impact on the business climate. So politicians improve business climate and the financial sector is pulling it down? Well, no. I mean, there were things that we needed to do, and we have now new heads of the FCMC, the central bank, and the finance Latvia, and they will sort of lead the change, and next year we will probably see how it has been assessed also by the Moneyval as well. National Alliance, what's your first reaction to this survey? Well, to me, it's important to underline that the business climate has improved compared to the sort of the baseline. 2.6 compared to 2.5 is an improvement, and the financial sector might have pulled us down more significantly. And what I agree when it comes to this study, in some areas we are doing better, in some areas we are probably doing not so well, but we see that there is a positive trend and we are making headway, and of course reforms that we had to implement a decade ago, the reforms that were implemented by our neighboring countries a lot sooner and a lot faster, of course, are holding us back from making a better progress. And of course we had a lot of disputes, and those discussions and disputes have not always led to efficient decision making, but nevertheless it has given us very good, well-considered, informed decisions. Mr. Asheradens, well, there are some sort of chronic problems that we have been indicated, and there are some problems in our thinking, and I mean, the overall thinking in Latvia. We compare ourselves to other Baltic countries and the bigger Baltic Sea region, and we are much more introverted and we are less sort of open to the outside world, and that is probably, the key difference that I should underline. And there are two things comparatively that we should underline. There's a major overhaul in the financial sector to improve the financial sector performance. I don't know whether we have hit the bottom yet. It seems that yes, and now we can start climbing out of the hole. And apart from these two areas that have been indicated, it's the quality of education and science that is also important. From an investor's perspective, what do you need from Latvia? I mean, the resources are there, and what else can you gain? So you said that we are introverted. Yes, we are very much introverted. We're not very much interested in the outside world. We have this internal sort of discussion with us within Latvia. Okay, so we're introverted. We get the investment from the outside world, from the FICIL, and FICIL every year, and this can correct me if I'm wrong, have said that human resources are the sort of the poorest factor, and we have identified here, 4 or 5 rather areas that are linked to human resources. Red means that there have been no improvements, no progress under the reign of either friendly or not so friendly coalition, and there is partial progress in other areas, and there are fewer of those areas. So let's spend some 30 minutes, talking about these problems regarding the local workforce, migrant workers, and let's talk about education. And I would like to give the floor to Zlata Zashirinska and give us an introduction and a question to the politicians here in the panel, or a comment, if you will. What's your opinion? What is happening or not happening? Why are we constantly underperforming in this regard?
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I think that if we look at the situation with human resources, at the moment the situation is really critical. We already said last year that we are actually speaking about a lack of human resources as such, and we need to separate the problems into two blocks, one being short-term problems and the other being long-term problems. And regarding the long-term problems, here we can speak about education and healthcare and etc. But in the short term, we need workers right now, and unfortunately, we can't achieve the progress we need with just improving efficiency and workflows. So my question is, what are we going to do about short-term solutions regarding labor accessibility and human resources? Last year we were speaking about the mobility program. This year we haven't seen any progress in that. So what's going to happen next? So you're saying that last year we didn't see any progress from the politicians. Well, I'd like to say that there's no progress in the situation as a whole. And obviously we need to seek political solutions. The policy makers need to seek solutions, because businesses themselves will always find ways to bring in migrant workers and give them jobs, but they want to be competitive and fair, and the rules need to be so. Well, why do you think that we are in the situation that we are? Well, I can only speak to the topics where we have direct political responsibility, that being healthcare. I think that our other colleagues could speak about these topics more. But as regards human resources, the accessibility of these resources, I think the work of our coalition, which combines the whole political spectrum, it's no surprise that we lack a unanimous opinion regarding human resources and migrant workers. Well, our political party would be in favor of a controlled flow of migrant workers in specific professions. And our partners agree with this, but when we are speaking about specific solutions, for example, we already had a proposal on the table in the Cabinet of Ministers, we can only agree on very sort of cosmetic solutions. Well, what I would say that my party is not all that conservative, but in any case, Mr. Girgens from KPV.LV have done a lot in terms of migrant worker solutions in this issue. But as regards the accessibility of the labor force, one decision that we've taken is a reduction of the unemployment benefits. Well, we have other conservative versions. Well, I definitely agree with the definition that Mr. Pavliuts gave, that we need a smart and controlled migrant flow of workers, and we have never been against this. The problem is with the human resources, the amount of human resources needed in specific sectors, and how to bring back people that have left Latvia to return. So any of you from the audience, feel free to interrupt if you feel the need to. Well, so in any case, we need to improve the efficiency of the labor force that we already have, because it's not as productive as it could be. It's not as healthy as it could be. Mr. Asheradins? Well, obviously, our red line here is medium qualified or unqualified labor. Well, what do you mean by red line? Well, we can't find support from the other coalition parties in terms of liberalization of all of these migrant flow processes. What happens today is that we have people being brought in from Poland, where there are very liberal rules in place, and I wouldn't see any significant changes taking place in Latvia in the near future. Well, I'd just like to add that the research shows that the overall opinion of investors is rated at 2.4 regarding of what's been done with the migrant worker situation. So this is on a scale of 1 to 5. So what can we conclude? Well, obviously the rating is not 5, nor is it 4. Renāte Strasdiņa, Microsoft Baltics, also from the Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Last year we spoke at length about labor accessibility, and we focused on 2 issues, one being smart immigration and the other being developing local talent. The most painful issue that we identified is that if we speak about migration, we don't have a single government body who is responsible for all of these matters. So beginning from how a person can actually come to Latvia, how they can receive services, how they can live here, how they can bring their family with them. And this is something that is as of yet unsolved. Does anyone have anything to say? Well, this is one of the main points in the re-emigration plan as well, to have a single point of service to provide all of, or be responsible for all of these matters that you mentioned. Well, so do you think the problem is in political decisions, or the fact that this should just be a routine work done? Well, it's a fragmented system, and it's true. This issue is definitely involves several areas, and there's no one government body that is responsible for all of them. So businesses also have to go to all of these different bodies responsible for all their different areas. Well, as I said before, we're rather introverted and not really interested in what people think about us. So in this regard, I think it would be important for a single entity that would be in charge of employment. For example, the welfare ministry is not responsible for employment as such. We don't have a specific government body for that. And we tried setting up an employment council which would bring together 3 ministries, but this activity has been discontinued and no one's speaking about it any longer. In any case, we should, if we look at Scandinavian countries, then they have ministries that are responsible for both economics and employment together. So what are you saying? If we don't have another ministry, then we can't solve the problem? Well, I'd like to give an example. First of all, the administrative territorial reform will be adopted by June. We'll probably have 40 or 41 districts, but in any case, we will be able to adopt this reform by summer. This will entail a consolidation of local governments, and which will in turn give this opportunity to create a more efficient system. And we've been working on these issues with my colleagues from the Parliament. We have written a completely new draft law for the e-governance law, which will be handed in for the first reading in Parliament. It entails a completely centralized system, an open data philosophy placed at the very heart of it. And if we completely reform this system of governance at local level, then I think that we can manage to solve many problems. Is this what you are talking about? Well, I tried to follow through what was being said, but I don't really see how EU governance will help us solve this issue and create this one single point of reference that will be a single body that will provide us all of the services. Well, if you have a digital service which is based on cooperation of various institutions, then if this digital service is available to you, then it doesn't matter which body is providing it. Yes, but that still means that all of these bodies have to cooperate among themselves. Well, but by creating this new centralized system, we will also regulate the cooperation between various bodies at a back office level. So, Mārtiņš Baurs from Telia Latvia. As regards e-governance, well, I tip my hat off to you because on many indicators we are actually ahead of other European countries. We're 7th or 8th in the EU out of the 28 member states in this regard, so that's a pretty good result. But what I wanted to speak about was labor accessibility and digital skills. We are deteriorating in terms of basic digital skills, basic programming skills. Since 2017, we've only gone down in the ratings instead of going up. And as from the opinion of the telecommunications sector, we have one of the fastest internets. Almost all households have internet and TV, but we don't actually have the actual users. So this all of this content is only being used for entertainment. And Samsung did a study on student digital IQ, and the students actually said that they're stuck in this entertainment sort of bubble, that they lack those proper skills to work with Excel and other office programs. So how can we achieve that the labor force actually is competent and has these necessary digital skills, so that we are no longer sliding down in the ratings, and so that we can improve our digital economy and to make it more competitive in that regard? All right. Well, my mom is a pensioner, and she is still working as a teacher in a regional school, and the school had bought these digital tablets and all of the necessary equipment, and she was the only one of all the teachers that was brave enough to actually use this equipment. Obviously, the state came forward, they gave the school all of this equipment, but there was no follow-up to provide the teachers with the necessary knowledge and skills and the courage to use this equipment on a regular basis. So whose fault is that? It's probably the Ministry of Education. Well, that's one element, and unfortunately Mr. Zakatistovs isn't here today. The employment agency has tens of millions of European funds every year to address the matter of providing skills to people who are at risk of unemployment. And these programs should be result-oriented to give these people the basic skill set that they need. Well, Mr. Ashradins, what do you have to say? Well, it's another critical problem, and again I have to say that we're not really following up with developments outside of our country. But I'd have to say that we have seen some progress. We've made the leap in the education system to the competence-based approach, which will definitely improve the situation. More and more young people are showing interest in digital technologies and digital skills, and the Latvian University has set up actually a study program for education specialists in digital skills. But one thing that we have seen is that out of all of the students graduating secondary school, only a quarter of them choose to take the IT final exam. So did you receive an answer? Well, perhaps not really an answer. Was more like conclusions that coincide with mine. Well, I think that we have plenty of ICT graduates in Latvia, but what happens to them after they graduate? Well, it's export. Well, it's a mistaken assumption that we have too many ICT specialists. We actually have a deficit of 3,000. The universities can take on 1,000 or 2,000 students, and only about half of them actually graduate, because many of them can drop out or be taken up by companies before they actually graduate. But unfortunately, few of them actually go on to study for a master's degree, and I think that we are actually seeing a positive trend, and that the amount of interest is increasing by students, when obviously we would also be able to import workers for this sector. Well, I think that maybe the root of the problem is that these studies are not based on actual facts or the correct facts, because we've discussed in the FICIL whether these indicators are correct or not, such as the OECD indicators and so forth. Well, the information at the disposal of the government is correct, I think. Well, ICE index shows that Latvia is above average in terms of ICT graduates, but at the same time, the amount of people with the proper digital skills is lower than the average. So this is sort of a disbalance here. Well, I'd like to urge you not to concentrate or focus only on the amount of people graduating ICT study programs. But we are speaking about school children, students. They will have their time, but we also need short-term solutions, as Lotta already mentioned. We need to figure out how to give these skills to people who are not ICT graduates, who are already working, who are out in the labor market, and who need these skills. So do you have any versions on how to do that? Well, I'd gladly just take away about 50 million from the employment agency and give it to the relevant associations, and you've proposed this and your colleagues disagree. Well, actually, as regards the adult education, the resources for requalification has not reached the necessary level as of yet. The labor market is changing, and the education system and adult education system is lagging behind. Well, if we look at Helsinki, there's a programming school on any street corner, and obviously the government here will not be able to organize such schools. They can be organized at that rate by private investors, but we can always combine the private support with government support, and if there is demand for it, then the government obviously will be able to come in and help the sector as well.
Well, you touched upon two important issues: further learning. When it comes to further learning, we can look what Belarus is doing and how they are requalifying their adult population. And also when it comes to the programming, we have the next programming cycle ahead of us, so we could prioritize that when it comes to EU public investments. And also we should rethink how our school network works when it comes to digital literacy. For example, youngest child saw or started working on a computer early in the 5th year, apart from what I have been providing him as an informal education and at home. I mean, schools are very slow to pick up on the digital sort of transformation. And well, can you provide this education earlier? Well, this is something that we unfortunately didn't manage to get prioritized. Was the education and health rather prioritized by this government? Yes, but one thing, there are politicians and people, but quite often civil servants are failing to take the decisions quickly enough. Which civil servants do you mean? Let's name them. Well, we'll give them 6 more months, and then we can come up with a grey list of civil servants or the public service grey list, state secretaries, deputy state secretaries who have underperformed when it comes to being goal-oriented and achieving fast change. But let's give them some time because, of course, they are pulling us down. Well, a year ago, Prime Minister Kaczynski, you said during this discussion that this coalition will not make any progress. They will not come up with a new migration program or scheme. And you were right. There is nothing there. So what should have been done, what hasn't been done, and what could we do more? Well, I think that this evaluation of 2019 also reflects what we did in 2018, and I mean tax reform, and the debate was very tough, and financial sector overhaul and de-risking and better supervision of banking sectors, what we were going through. And in this regard, the Prime Minister has done a great job, bringing this, to the end or finalizing these changes. But somehow it seems that, although there are a lot of quarrels between coalition partners, they have not, brought wreckage to some of the plans. And to sum it up, and as Mr. Pavlic said, we should see, where the university governance reform is headed, what was going to happen with school network, and what is going to happen with health reform, which has been postponed now. And probably the new tax reform will, put things in order and will bring some more clarity. And then we will have enough human resources. Well, when it comes to human resources, I don't think there are going to be any much improvement there, but I have nothing to boast about either. So, I mean, we cannot open our labor market, and lifelong learning has always been a hot topic, and probably now we need deeper or wider interventions, and we should have somebody responsible for that. Ministry of Welfare is, of course, partly responsible for that. Ministry of Economy is partly responsible for that. At the end of the day, nobody's responsible for everything, and that's why nothing is changing. Okay, last 10 minutes. What else would you like to raise? Regarding digital transformation, dug up from the FICIL board. One of the things that, or one of the options that we considered in the board was that in order to bring in high-skilled labor, highly qualified labor, we should, choose those who have gone through digital transformation, the local experts, and try to keep them in Latvia and probably move them to other enterprises. Have you considered such, moving around or competence exporting among enterprises to make up for the digital skills gap? Well, I think this is more of a sort of a market tool, and you can object if you want. I don't think that the government can intervene with the market in that way. We can only support or finance something when it comes to employing experts. That's up to the market or market players, and that's up to how much you're willing to pay them. There are problems, and this is probably one of the easiest problems that you are facing. So you have low unemployment, and we have had different other problems as well, but at the enterprise level, lack or shortage of labor, of course, is a problem, and sick leaves and sick notes is a problem. Yeah, this is what you meant by problems in the health sector. Yes, especially in the last couple of years, we have seen in different industries that there are fake sick notes and sick leaves, and people are just absent, not really notifying. You can't do anything for 10 days or up to 40 days when you can fire them, and in between those 10 and 40 days, they also take their annual leave, and they can basically be absent for virtually 40 days. So you're saying that they are defrauding the system. Well, yes, they are defrauding the benefit system, and they are, able. They are not incapacitated, and they have bogus or sham sick notes, and they fake their sickness. And eventually, we of course fire them, but you can fire them only after 40 days. Well, when it comes to employment rights and contracts and so on and so forth, this is not a matter for the politicians or for the law. If you have a suspicion that the system is being defrauded, there are complaint mechanisms and procedures. Ministers cannot really intervene. I mean, we cannot go to a GP, stand next to him, and control how they're issuing sick notes. So you're saying that we can't do anything? No. The answer is that we have to work within the framework of the law. You have to raise the alarms. You have to, raise your complaints, and then we can go to health inspection, and we can work through the health inspection. Have you complained to health inspection? Well, but if we don't have the labours, how can management find them? Yeah, but you mentioned GPs, but you don't have any proof or evidence, no facts, no figures. You're claiming that somebody is giving them sick notes without the justification. So if you have a complaint, file one. Well, we are looking or judging based on the statistics, but you have a real accusation here of fake sick notes being issued, so you have to give facts as well. Well, you have another explanation for that. Not a different explanation, but I think that the increasing number of those sick notes is not because somebody is defrauding the system, but because our workforce is getting older, in fact, and they are, suffering from different conditions, and the working conditions, of course, force them, to think about what they can or cannot do, and that is also a sort of a professional resilience issue as well. I don't want to blame any employers, but there are a lot of workplaces where people are paid handsomely and they are very much appreciated, but they don't really feel nice there, and this is how they just take a break. And I've heard from the wood processing industry that employers have to pay for the sick leave for too many days, and probably that's unreasonable, and that's probably how employers are paying in double. They pay for for restoring the work capacity, and as well as for the absence. One of the solutions would be, to reach out to the primary care providers and, request them to step up when it comes to the quality, and they should meet those quality indicators. So they are failing to meet the quality indicators, so they shouldn't be paid additionally for providing quality, and we are redistributing monies every year within the health budget. And well, but there are too many problems. Yes, in fact, this is a very problematic area, primary care or GP practices. And yes, we could probably reduce from 10 to 5 days the sick leave, because costs have been increasing quite drastically over the past 3 years. But this is something that has to be solved by the Ministry of Welfare, Ministry of Finance. We have coalition meetings on Wednesday, so probably somebody could propose it today, because today is Wednesday, or maybe next week or the week after it. So we need some kind of evidence to base our decisions on. Okay, let's probably put a stop here when it comes to human resources, because there are other topics that we still have to discuss. A year ago, you said that in 12 months you'll be able to assess the progress of the tax reform. It's now been assessed or evaluated, and the majority of the respondents are saying that it's, about 3, around 3, 1 to 5. So, Mr. Kaczynskis, are you happy about that? Well, zero tax on reinvested profit is, of course, what we are happy about, and non-taxable income, of course, has made a lot of people angry, and the procedures have made a lot of people angry, and this was, a compromise that we achieved, and we knew that zero tax on reinvested profit, it was obviously going to have impact, and this is what we are having. Was it a mistake? No, I mean, that wasn't a mistake. It was some sort of an option and a way to introduce some kind of progressive tax and make it easier for families with children. Has it improved demographics? Well, I, with my 4 children, am of course feeling better, and I have benefited from this tax reform, but was it worth it? Generally speaking, well, that is something that we still have to decide, but we cannot simplify. Everyone shouldn't be paying 25% irrespective of the industry or sector that they are working in. There was another surprising thing. I was surprised that almost half of our people have 2 jobs, not 1 job. You were surprised about that? Well, I didn't think that the share was so big, that there were so many people that are working several jobs, and that, of course, also has a certain impact, and if we have to decide on something, then we can make this decision, but we shouldn't phase out zero tax on reinvested profit. And nobody's doubting that. Well, nobody's doubting it here in this room, but some others are saying that it should be banned or phased out. So, to conclude, your expert opinion, the foreign investors' perspective, the good things, the bad things, or what needs to be changed in our tax system, and I mean needs to be changed by the parliament or by the current government. When it comes to taxes, retrospectively, any tax system is a tool to limit or restrict or promote or facilitate something, and before, what we are seeing currently is that there are different opinions on the tax system. What I would like to urge you to do before you introduce any new taxes or before you make any changes in the tax system, please carefully analyze what were the, consequences of previous changes, instead of, going by your gut feeling whether it will work or not, but have evidence-based, some kind of analysis. And what we would like to have more is more information, and you're missing information. Yes, we would like to have more information, and we should have clearer goals as well. What exactly are we supporting? Are we supporting equality? Are we supporting fairness? Are we supporting startups? Are we supporting, other kinds of enterprises? Such a clarity, and we don't have that clarity. Well, I don't see that clarity at the moment. Maybe Mr. Kaczynskis can comment that. Mr. Lansing, do you agree, or do you have a different opinion of tax system? Well, to me, tax system is a tool which allows us to redistribute wealth in the society, and over the past 12 months, people who were commenting, our development trends, said that we need to address the sort of the raging inequality that we have. And if you look at the system from this perspective, in terms of reducing inequality, tax system hasn't really achieved anything much. So basically, a non-taxable income and different brackets of non-taxable income doesn't really help those who do not have any income, and those without the income, they cannot really benefit from the government support or assistance, and the healthcare is inaccessible for them because they cannot get there, because they cannot afford a ticket or a fee or a fare rather, so they cannot access education. So in terms of reducing inequality, tax system has not really achieved anything much, and there haven't been any clear goals set in this regard. About goals, what comments do you have? Let me, talk about past and then talk about the future. What Mr. Kaczynski's mentioned, tax reform and its previous phases. Just 2 comments. Sentiment shows that tax system has become much more complicated, much more complex, which is a problem, and different non-taxable income brackets. There are mistakes that need to be corrected. Adjustments are needed, but there is also a positive feedback. Zero tax on reinvested profit. That's a positive trend. As regards to the impact and the consequences, well, let's see how this, influences the enterprise figures and whether productive investments have been enhanced by this. What are the sort of the tangible benefits of it? We have lost more than 300 million euros in tax revenue, and the corporate tax collection projections are not being fulfilled, and we are also failing, to increase the wages in healthcare sector and so on and so forth. So it's too early to talk about the impact. Well, it's too early to talk about the impact. If you would assess it now, you wouldn't really be able to understand what is happening. Now, about the future, what my main concern about the future is that the coalition is still not clear as regards to what are the outcomes of the intended reform, and we would like to have a separate discussion with FICIL on this. And we should have 3 priorities: greener, fairer, and simply a tax system. So instead of non-taxable income, we should have tax allowances or tax reductions, so that would be fairer, greener, less tax to those who are emitting less CO2 and so on and so forth, and simply a tax system. As Mr. Kaczynski suggested, 25% for everyone. Well, that's not probably as simple as that. Any other options? What concerns progressive tax? I mean, they created a system which is too complicated, and you could have gone for a simpler system instead of having multiple brackets of the non-taxable income. You could have, you should have tried for a simpler system, to which Prime Minister Kaczynski is saying, I can't really oppose your party opinion. Well, yes, we probably didn't propose that, but in order not to increase progressive tax on one end of the spectrum, we sort of spread it across the spectrum, but progressive tax is something that we should have. Fair taxes and fair competition is also something that we should go for. Everyone should pay taxes equally, and currently we have different allowances and so forth that are missing sort of the point, and micro company tax, for example, is being abused to a large extent and so on and so forth. So you would like to phase out the micro company tax. Well, we should either limit it or sort of change it, to have a sort of a tax regime which we would call the start, and then they would gradually sort of transition into paying a bigger tax, so to avoid that cleaning services, for example, are continuously paying micro company tax, because that wasn't the intention behind the micro company tax. And somebody suggested that we should have tax allowances instead of those brackets, non-taxable income brackets, that those non-taxable income brackets are no longer applicable. Well, I would like to say no. I mean, many people's income for the children has become so big that they are no longer eligible for this benefit. So, and we shouldn't switch only to the benefit. So that would be like giving a stick, not giving a fish, and that way we would have a lot of benefit abusers. So what you're saying is that there aren't those who are abusing micro company tax. Well, they are not sort of fake micro companies, but they are still sort of abusing they are working legitimately, because I'm looking at the State Revenue Service here, and Madam Pelilka is here. And is that a problem of the tax authority? Is that an issue for the tax authority? Well, they're working within the bounds of the law. They are using these advantages, but the intention of the tax was different.
I just wanted to touch upon the complexity of the tax system. The World Bank and other international organizations have assessed that we have a very complex system. I think it's 3 times more hours that are spent than in Estonia to complete your tax returns. And in terms of the next budget, perhaps the FICIL can come in to work with us to suggest the actual proposals that should be changed, and then we can assess them. Well, so we should do everything possible to reduce this gap between us and Estonia. Well, hello to everyone, and Ms. Indriksson, I'd have to say that we would achieve a lot more if we didn't argue among ourselves but work together. The Ministry of Finance has drafted a new accounting law. It's open to new proposals from anyone. So that's about the accounting law. As regards our gap with Estonia, it is true we do have to spend a lot more time in preparing our accounting documents, but as compared to Estonia, we do have a reason for this, that being that we have a lot more tax exceptions and reductions. So the administration process is much more complicated than in Estonia. Well, but in the situation where Mr. Pavliot says that we cannot we don't have yet a clear picture of the consequences, and then Mr. Eglid says that FICIL has to come in with proposals and we can fight on. And then we have the other news that the Finance Ministry already has a draft law that they've created. So you've already analyzed everything. You have a clear picture of everything, and so it just seems that you're working outside of the whole system. Well, not exactly. As regards the pre-assessment done by the Ministry of Finance, we do have indicative data that we have analyzed based on assumptions, but you're not sharing it with anyone. But it's true that we will be able to assess the actual result of, for example, the reinvested profits only after companies hand in their annual reports, and that will be in May. So we have to wait a couple of months, and only then can policymakers actually see the actual consequences. But you will come forth with your draft law before May, regardless of what happens everywhere else. Well, the ministry has set up, and the government has set up, a consultative council, an advisory council on these tax issues, and that will come up with proposals that the Ministry of Finance will definitely assess. But I would not like to comment on anything that the Prime Minister has said to this extent. Well, Mr. Asheradens, your party has given us the Prime Minister, so you must comment on what has been said. Well, if that's what the news say, that the Prime Minister has a proposal, then he will come with his proposal. But for you as a party, haven't you discussed it? Well, it's clear that any tax reform generates very hot emotions and a lot of frustrations. That's definitely true. And I think that an assessment of 3 for the tax system isn't all that bad. I mean, people don't generally think of taxes as a good thing. But I think that many companies have been able to recover out of the previously negative situation that many of them found themselves in, and our economy has actually been able to recover without extensive support from the banking sector. So I think that's good news. And obviously, as was mentioned, in May we will be able to see the results of the reinvested profit rules after the annual reports have been handed in, and I'm very happy to hear that the Ministry of Finance has drafted their new accounting law. This will be definitely interesting to discuss. One thing that we have to discuss is the micro company tax, which should be revoked in my opinion. Well, I'd like to ask the author of the study whether 3 is a good rating. Well, that depends on your self-confidence, I guess. I would say that it's not very bad. It's average. Of course, one thing is to say that no one likes taxes. Obviously, that's clear for anyone. But this study and also others performed on the business sector show that this year and next year foreign investors are basically focusing on 2 ideas. One being what Zlata already said, that foreign investors are urging for a more detailed analysis in decision making. And in this previous reform, as never before, we had very in-depth analysis. We had the World Bank come in. We paid 300,000 for this in-depth analysis, and so many other expenses that were paid as well. So there was in-depth discussion and analysis, and I hope that it will continue to the very end. And the coalition should just put a stop to overly political discussions in this regard. Another thing that foreign investors have noted is that it's clear to foreign investors and businesses in general that we need stability. We need assurances that if changes are being done, well, we're joking around, but no one will be laughing if it's actually done. So changing the tax system around frequently creates instability. Obviously, last year the opinion of the tax reform was would have been much lower. Nowadays, today, investors have sort of gotten used to the situation, gotten used to the new system. And again, policymakers are coming with a new proposal. Obviously, this isn't the first time that something's being changed, and now the investors are beginning to be a bit scared if something is going to change every single year. Well, I'd just like to add on that the business people that I've spoken with awaiting the next decision. So I wouldn't want these decisions to be taken only in autumn. I'd like to see the Prime Minister come with his proposals as quickly as possible. We all remember the unimplementable promises that were made last year. We really do need stability and clarity above all. We can't put off these proposals and decisions to the end of the year. Well, yes, Mr. Zakharov's from Boston Finances. I have a very short question. Can policymakers tell FICIL today on which month of 2020 will we have the final information about tax changes as of January 1st, 2021? Can you give such a deadline? Well, as regards what Mr. Kuczynski said, that what the Ministry of Health needs to do, well, the question is just about a specific month. Well, I just wanted to answer the previous question. Well, there are other people that want to ask their questions again. Can you just say which month? Well, first of all, the Ministry of Health has to identify the taxes that will be earmarked for healthcare. That will be done within a month or so. As regards a specific deadline, we have been discussing that we have to take these decisions by the middle of the year so that there's proper time for people to get ready. So we had decided that we did not change anything last year, and by this summer will be the only time that something is changed. 15th of May would be our deadline. I have a very specific question about the reduced VAT. We look at it as a good thing. It's helping our agriculture sector, but and we support the this initiative being continued, but I'd like to hear the opinion of the Ministry of Finance, whether this initiative will be continued and to what extent. Well, as regards reduced VAT, you're speaking about fruits and vegetables. This initiative is being discussed in the Development Commission that I mentioned. The government decision on implementing this rate was given a specific term, saying that in 2020 an assessment will be done, and based on the actual results the next decisions will be taken. So for the time being, no decision has been taken in this regard. Policymakers, do you have something to say? Well, I'd like to see the analysis. If we see that there's a benefit to the producers and not the sellers, then, or the traders as such, then we will support it. But I have a suspicion that this initiative has created many benefits, but they don't mostly lie with just the manufacturers and producers. Well, another question. Looking at the new tax reform, if we look at it from a Baltic level, it's clear that all three countries have different systems, but if we look at the excise duty, then it's not clear what's going on with this. Could you please explain? Well, the New Conservative Party, for us, the main issue in the tax reform is employment, labor taxes, and the untaxable income, that we need to approach the level of Estonia and Lithuania because our gap with these countries at the moment is too large. As regards excise duties, we do have to take a decision as of 1st of March. We have the risk that the excise duty on alcohol will go up by 30%. Well, it's not a risk, it's a decision that's been taken. You can only suggest that it be revoked. We have already taken a decision for a specific term that the excise duty will be increased. Well, we've had extensive discussions in our subcommittee with all stakeholders, and I think the main concern right now is for the cross-border trade in border areas that will be affected by these changes as of 1st of March. The excise duty will also increase in Lithuania, so we'll be at the same level. And there are other beverages where, for example, excise duty is lower in Latvia than in Lithuania, for example, for wine. So we should not be taking generalized decisions that will implement the overall balance in the long term. So if Lithuania has raised the bar, then we should stick with it, and then Estonia will come to see that they have to change their decisions as well. Well, the situation is that the finance ministers of all three countries are in discussion about these issues to ensure that a balance is struck. I can only comment the existing situation. It is now clear, or rather it's very likely that the projected profits from or projected collection of excise duties from alcohol will not be fulfilled, and we can't live separately from the other Baltic states. We can't imagine that we can exist without them. Obviously, the other countries are close enough for people to just cross the border to buy whatever they need. Andezali from Visma Group, I'd like to add that, yes, we are speaking a lot about content here. And obviously this is a very important reform in terms of content, but we have to learn from our previous mistakes, which were mainly the amount of time for implementing the reform and how it is implemented. As Mr. Pavlut said, that we will have half a year heads up, so to speak. And my worry is that if a decision is taken by June, then actual decisions will only be taken when the budget is adopted, which will be more approaching the end of the year, so most likely October. Well, we'll do our best to do it quicker. Well, but for a company, the budget for 2021 needs to be handed in by August. Well, let's move on to our next topic, that being the financial sector stability. As regards progress here, again, we see a slightly better rating than for the taxes. So the high incidence of 4 improves the rating, but there was actually some that said that it's just 1. So some saying that the situation is very poor. I see that Carlos Tsarbolis is one of our speakers that can ask a question about this topic. Well, for 12 years in a row, we have been seeing lower crediting as regards GDP. So what can we do, especially in the context of the Moneyval assessment and this sort of purging of the system that's going on? What can we do to improve the situation, which is in stark contrast with the situation in Estonia and Lithuania? Well, I'd like to ask our representatives from the Ministry of Finance as well to say, what is your opinion? What could we do? Well, hello, thank you for giving me the floor. We'd like to explain our opinion of this issue. So, as I said before, from the 3 representatives that were here last year, 2 are here today as well. And as from our side, from the Bank of Latvia, this is one of our priorities. This is a very important issue for the national economy. But I think that this is there isn't a single cure for the whole thing. It's a sentiment in the society, in the sector, the assessment of the financial sector, including the Moneyval assessment, various other signals that we are receiving, is creating an environment where banks do not feel sure enough that they can increase their risk exposure. So my colleagues and I have been looking at this for some time already. Well, but if you personify the question, what can you do? What's the first answer that pops into your mind? Well, in my responsibility includes to work with the compliance and AML issues, where banks were saying that the supervisory bodies are creating an unclear environment, unclear rules. So my colleagues and I, we have started working on much clearer guidelines and drafting these guidelines. We're discussing them for 2 months already, and work on actual text has already begun. So this continues to be a painful issue for many. The other thing is Also related to banks and the capital adequacy of banks and rules for this, which is a very specific matter, but it's also been raised and it's been discussed as to what we as the supervisory body can do to improve the situation. Here again, we have to take into consideration European law and the restrictions from the World Bank, but we have been discussing this from the beginning of the year, and we're certain that we will come to a solution together with the banks. Well, so are these painful issues becoming less painful? Well, if we speak about lending and loans, then we can only speak about increased lending. Another issue is how quickly this is increasing. And I'd have to say that the rate of increase is sort of lagging behind other Baltic states and other countries, but in any case, lending is increasing. It is not decreasing. Another issue that I'd like to raise is this new understanding, this new culture that's forming and shaping and in the financial sector. But this is, in any case, a horizontal matter that includes not only the financial sector, but also other areas. There are many issues where we have to work with explaining the situation and rules and guidelines. But what I'd also like to add is that one thing that we tend to overlook is that for some reason, all financial development resources, when we say financial development resources, we think loans, but there are various different models out there, various financial instruments available, for example, capital market funding tools. So if we are trying to achieve national economy development and national development as such, we need to make use of all of these financial instruments as a whole.
So let's give the floor to the politicians. Well, previously you gave, the floor based on gender, whereas now you have given sort of the floor on different principles, to the legislator, and the executive branch, and we think that the politicians or the legislature has done everything that it is necessary. Now the ball is sort of on the court side of the executive branch, so it is about guidelines that have been mentioned, developing compliance culture, developing new mindset in the financial sector, new awareness, risk awareness, and how that might promote or facilitate growth. But we'll see on 17th of February what Manival says about this. So other politicians, what are you saying? Have you done everything and the ball is on their side of the court? Yes, I think that Latvia, generally speaking, has done a lot. But the overhaul of the financial sector, is a sort of the project. It is the sort of the project of the Unity and the Prime Minister, Unity political party, and we have been sort of monitoring and observing. We as a coalition party have supported their decisions, also in the course of adoption of the budget. But let's see, how Manival evaluates this on 17th of February. If their evaluation is poor, then I'll be very much disappointed, because what we did in 2019, we indeed, made business environment much tougher for the exporting companies. We haven't, on the other hand, jailed some of the people for money laundering and so on and so forth. Compared to our neighboring countries, in 2019, we experienced a major sort of shrinking of the financial sector. Was it worth it, overhauling it, given the shrinking? Let's see. And then you will hear from our political party, how, sort of the heads have performed, or how the sort of the managers have performed. Your decision or your opinion? Well, not only our opinion, sort of the assessment more. Well, that sounded interesting, but let me also insert my comment regarding the credit crunch and lending crunch, or insufficient availability of loans. I don't think that it's the financial sector stability. We didn't have that growth either before the Moneyval report. This is an assumption that we have heard for many years, and we are comparing ourselves to neighbors. We don't really we shouldn't really compare ourselves to our neighbors in all regards. And now banks are changing their models and are trying to find new market opportunities or niches, and their, model of business is changing, and hopefully they will find a new model and will start lending, providing loans to SMEs. But, let's not start talking about hoping what they will do. Politicians have their role and banks have their roles. Yes, but availability of funding is a very big problem for rural areas because they don't have access to loans for their seasonal needs, so to say. Well, yes, we should simplify the lenders. Well, FCMC is monitoring the lenders too closely. Well, lenders are sort of equally monitored, equally controlled by the FCMC as much as banks. Do you agree with that? Well, I have also met with other kinds of lenders and lending institutions, and we have identified the problems. So it's not about monitoring or controls, really. It's about regulations, rules, and laws that need to be changed, and we can find a solution together with politicians. It's not only about control. There are other gaps and problems. Apart from, from throwing the ball towards executive branch, are there any other ideas? Well, nobody's really trying to shy away from the problem. Government, tackle the crisis head on. We have new FCMC management, or the new head of the FCMC, new FIU head, and I hope that the Moneyval report will be much more favorable. But as Mr. Eglitz mentioned, what we are unfortunately struggling with is the ability to detect financial crime, investigate it efficiently, and prosecute efficiently. That's one thing. But also the funding, the availability of capital for the proper functioning of market is also another problem. The biggest four banks that are working towards the market are in a very interesting, peculiar situation. Some have been impacted or affected by the AML issues, and some are restructuring, so they are not really keen to lend or money, and we see that they really are withholding the loans, and that of course requires a government response. As regards as parliament, response, but what do you mean by response of the government? Well, the government has already responded. It has decided on the merger of FCMC and central bank. So the resources available to the central bank will be now available to FCMC and can be used on recovering the financial sector. But the number of decisions will have to be taken on how the financial sector will function in future. So you have agreed with Mr. Eglitz. Unfortunately, investigation prosecution is struggling, and financial crime combating is struggling. And I see Madam Zon and Madam Znodin is there, the head of the FIU. There's nobody from the state police whose commander or chief has today resigned. Okay, we don't have the state police, but we have somebody from the state revenue service, or the deputy head. So what's your take on this efficiency evaluation 3.2? Is it you, or is it about others? Well, good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen, my former FICIL colleagues and my current colleagues. Good afternoon, colleagues from our different sectors, also from the sector who is mentioning that the ball is no longer on their side of the court. Well, I would like to say that 3.2 is a very poor evaluation, and Agnes can correct me. The reason for that is that probably when the study was compiled, when the research was done, when the entrepreneurs were surveyed, this survey didn't really reflect the improvements or the progress that we had achieved, because the entrepreneurs were not aware of what changes we had implemented. We are currently working with the international experts, trying to explain progress and changes to them, and now I can also share what we have done with you as well. That it is of course secret information, so I can't really fully share it with you. Some of it is confidential, but if I would share it, then the evaluation would quickly become 5. When will we have access to this information? Well, I hope that one day it will be disclosed, but I hope that it will be today. In fact, that all these improvements will be revealed. Moneyval, unfortunately, like our system, is also working with some delays. I can't really share the information with you on the 4th of December meeting with the Moneyval, and I can't really mention what we discussed on the 17th of December, because there are a lot of foreign colleagues who will probably will disseminate this information further. So that's why I have to keep my mouth shut at the moment and keep it confidential. But believe me, 3.2 does not really reflect what we have done. Not only politicians have done a great job adopting the laws, changing the laws, and I would like to thank this Prime Minister and the former Prime Minister for, being very decisive, and we in fact had to respond quickly to the processes that were not initiated by us, and we did a great job putting things back in order. But this evaluation does really reflect what has been done. Yes, but the cases are not in court. Well, I'm coming from the Supreme Court Senate meeting, and I just met with judges. Of course, if you take the previous reporting periods, not a lot to boast about, but in terms of criminal investigations now in court, those have increased by 50%, by half, which also will soon be sort of converted into judgments by judges. So please do not, require from us results where there has been, no reaction for many years, and everything has now just kicked into sort of the right gear. So what do you think about fighting financial crime? Hello, my name is Chris Engineer. I'm from the Customs and Financial Investigations Board, and I can only agree with the head of the FIU. We began, very active work in early 2018, investigating the attempts to launder money or illicit proceeds, and we very quickly implemented the Moneyval recommendations, and we also proposed changes in the criminal law with regard to declaring or misdeclaring cash, which was one of the recommendations of the Moneyval, and we have achieved good results. Changes were adopted last July or June. 47 criminal investigations within the past 6 months have been opened. We've arrested more than 100 million euros. We have frozen, 100 million euros. So this money, which was sort of flowing into our country and being laundered here, will be probably recovered as illicit proceeds, and we have also increased quite quickly, the number of money laundering cases. 12 money laundering cases compared to the previous period have been completed or have been investigated and are now in court. So would you evaluate yourself at 5 as well, or wouldn't you be as brave as Madam Norton? So this is on a scale from 1 to 5. Well, it's difficult to evaluate my performance myself. It should be probably Prosecutor General who should evaluate it, and we haven't had any, bad feedback from the Prosecutor General's office about, our performance. But as Madam Norton said, we are keenly waiting, judgments in these cases. And currently, right now it's too early, to say what's happening. Yes, but, courts are independent, as we all know. Yes, of course. You wanted to add something. Well, I'd been a lawyer for many, many years, and I have a lot of court experience. And this is the evaluation of the progress. Of course, I agree with those that who are saying that there hasn't been progress, but now we're basically, sort of standing on the verge of probably being the best in the world. But believe me, the evaluation should be as bad as this. And Mr. Vanovskis is still a lawyer, and he's been holding a mic for a while. Now, what's your opinion? Yes, my name is Mars Vanovskis. I'm the Investment Protection, Security and Court Efficiency Work Group Chair on the FICIL, and I'm happy about the positivity and sort of the conviction that we just heard, but I have a very specific question to the politicians and to the government representatives here. And it is linked to what Madam Znortinja said and the head of the FCMC said, or the Financial Conduct Authority said. So this progress has been coupled with with a lot of changes in the legislation, and entrepreneurs, of course, were quite significantly affected by those legislative changes, so they had to sort of get on top of all those changes and to integrate all of them. And those changes had to be justified. Last year we talked about changes for the third reading. Probably this problem has subsided. But what about our proposal that has been raised a number of times, not only at the beginning of the legislative initiative, but also at the end of the legislative initiative? We should have a clear, concise summary of how this law had been debated, what were the main proposals or changes before different readings, and what were the outcomes. So that's one question. And what I would also like to tell you is that although we have a lot of laws being adopted, the government must be able to discriminate between the abuse or criminal intent and sort of the learning process. And we shouldn't punish those who are just, trying to learn how to cope with all the changes in the legislation. We have to be able to discriminate between the learning and between the abuse or an offence. So that is my comment to the government, and also as regards to the quality of the legislature. As regards to the quality of legislation, you have sort of made a nice sort of transition to next slide, which is all about the rule of law, corruption, shadow economy, and legislation, of course, or legal framework. You have third in red, approximately, when it comes to the legislation. Majority are saying that there is, some progress, little progress. Half are saying that there are changes, some progress, some improvements. While when it comes to other areas like judicial system, half are saying that it's not really improved or are not really recognizing any improvements. As regards to the legislation, now we are through financial crime, other crimes, rule of law, going into the legislation. So what are your comments, or what is your reaction to what has been said? Well, legislative flood is both good and bad. It means that the parliament is working efficiently, adopting a lot of laws, which is good, of course. As regards to the quality of laws, analytical capacity of the parliament has been a problem for decades, and now it has again resurfaced, and you have again said that we should probably add an additional summary or additional comments to the legislative initiative, how it, or to track back how it has been adopted, or whether it has been good or not, and so on and so forth. As regards to this positive assessment in the middle pie, I think this is what we have addressed quite efficiently in the economic committee and municipal committee. So this is how we'd forced the city council to respond, as a shareholder, to follow the law, and they should fire people, board members who are not credible, who don't have the credibility, do not comply with the eligibility criteria. So in this regard, CIMA has done a lot. So that there's been a positive progress. Now, about the rule of law, the legislative process. Well, as regards to the legislative process, and a lot of proposals before the third reading, this has no longer sort of a widespread problem. There are, of course, exceptions when we have to sort of, push those proposals and have to have shorter deadlines because of civil service or because of other reasons, where we don't have the luxury of having enough time to go through all the three readings, so we have to fast track some of the legislative initiatives. But I fully agree with you that there should be some kind of summary or report attached to the legislative initiative that would explain why this legislative initiative has been initiated, why so many proposals have been submitted, and why there were many changes before the third reading, so that we could somehow analyze and take stock of what has been happening. Anything else? Any other reactions? Well, I would also like to react to what has been said. If you look at how laws are going through the Parliament, and then the initial summary, according to rules of procedure, you can't change the sort of the introduction or the summary of the law, because the summary or the introduction of the law basically explains, why this law has been brought about, or legislative initiative has been brought about. And this is something that the Parliament should probably address in order to improve the quality of the laws. And after the adoption of the law, the committee should probably provide its comment, about who's targeted by the law and what does it imply, and so on and so forth. Could you have several committee meetings in one day? Or several, plenary sittings in one day, which happened recently, in fact. No, this is, about the procedure. This is about, summary that sort of would provide a sort of explanation of how this law was being adopted. And also what Mr. Majnowski said, that the second thing that he mentioned that would deserve a sort of a wider discussion, sort of the impression of the rule of law when you're sort of following the letter of the law, or you sort of blindly follow the provisions. And there's Madame Messane and the case of Denmark, and we have been following the letter of the law, but we haven't really sort of analyzed the case based on its merits. And well, Denmark, that's another case. Well, I'm not trying to sort of diverge here or go off track, but we have to be able to discriminate who's criminal and who's an offender and who's not, and this is a sort of an ever-changing situation. If we follow the letter of the law, then we should punish everyone without analyzing, but we should carefully analyze how laws should be applied and to whom.
Well, the improving of the legislation, what we have to take into consideration is that about 65% of the parliament actually changed after the last election. We have a very much more dynamic and younger parliamentarians now. Well, last year we had a very dynamic discussion here, trust me. Well, but in any case, for businesses, feel free to come to us, to our parliamentary committee, our parliamentary group. We will definitely hear you out. And I'd like to say that we've seen significant changes over the past year as regards criminal proceedings, where we've closed existing gaps. So last year we did agree, and thank you for the work with the economic court. It's very unprecedented, such a high rating for this judicial system. Well, almost a third of the businesses said that the overall quality of legislation has improved. So is this too optimistic? Is this true? Well, hello to everyone. I'm still the director of the Competition Council. I would expand this issue to say that it's not only entrepreneurs. Over the course of my 8 years of tenure it's not only, I've seen that it's not only the actual businesses that perform violations or commit violations, it's also the actual framework of rules that can often impede competition and hinder competition. So, for example, at a lower level, we had a competition, international competition day in December, where we tried to identify the main obstacles to businesses, and one of the more interesting conclusions was, for example, the material that the Latvian flag has to be sewn from, that the restrictions are so strict that there is basically only one company that can provide the material. There is ancient technology that has to be used for the actual sewing process. So sometimes these rules are unnecessarily strict. For example, I mean, companies could start producing the flag from a different material or a different fabric, but the rules don't let them do so. So this is just one single example, but there are many various examples. For example, company Tīrīga. Well, but you're speaking in the past, but the company actually exists. Well, yes, and they had violations, and they will continue to have violations, obviously. That's why we have a competition council that works and supervises the situation. Obviously, violations continue to exist. They will be so in the future as well. But we have to speak openly about them. We have to speak publicly about them. And my conclusion would be that this is something that we have to expand also to what the public governance system has done to improve the situation, because obviously we can discuss and debate about this at length. For example, that many small companies don't feel respected in the regions because local governments are setting up their own companies and pushing out the small entrepreneurs. And there are many issues that Latvia needs to work on. Where, for example, we are not very open to new players coming into the market. So if we only judge black or white whether the situation has or hasn't improved, well, it's just like with weather in Latvia. You can't say that it's hot or cold. It's somewhere in the middle. Well, we have time for just a couple of concluding questions. And is there something that is very important that someone has not yet been able to ask or say on either side of the room? Well, just briefly, we do have one problem that persists, and it goes like storm to storm, and it's a very important issue for foreign investors as well, for foreign capacity coming into Latvia through public procurements, the quality of public procurement, so construction, healthcare, and various other sectors, waste management. We have public procurements where the requirements are not clear, they are not justified. This is a lengthy discussion, but this is a very topical issue. And my question would be to the policymakers about public procurement centralization and supervision of them. Is this something that is being discussed, or perhaps do you see other solutions? Well, yes. So let's see. Do you see centralization as a solution or a different kind of tool? Well, as regards company Tīrīga, this wasn't public procurement legislation. This was a different piece of legislation that created the problem. But the next thing I'd like to say is that these things do not go unpunished. Obviously, we are now discussing the option to fire the council of the city of Riga, the council of Riga. And again, I'd like to also thank the Competition Council and the Corruption Prevention Bureau for their cooperation in their attention given to these issues. We are currently not publicly discussing this, but at the time when it was topical, we did speak about one possible solution that we proposed for public procurement legislation is in construction, is to have a centralized documentation, so standardized contracts, standardized specifications, standardized templates. So, of course, if we can't agree on a FIDIC standard, then we can at least agree on a standardized documentation for public buildings. Well, I'd actually like to see the public procurement supervisory body to be more active in the process, to also have an investigative capacity to sort of look into the cases that seem a bit fishy or off in some way, because they would be able to sort of weed out many procurements that are not up to par. Well, I think another issue that we have to speak about is educating those coming up with the procurement documentations. This applies not only construction but also other areas. Well, in conclusion, let's give the floor again to Mr. Sauka for his comments about what has been discussed here today, what else we should emphasize. So, if someone does have something very important to say, then shout it out, but we will now give the floor to Mr. Sauka for his conclusions. Well, thank you, Janis. Thank you, everyone, for the very interesting, engaging discussion. I definitely noticed that as opposed to last year's discussion, this was a very sort of calm discussion, sort of reminiscent of Scandinavia, and seeing as we are trying to move towards the Scandinavian way of life, I think that's a good sign. Obviously, we had a very differing opinions, but it was a calm discussion. I really enjoyed it, and I like listening to the various opinions. There are many things to mention, and that were not mentioned yet. First of all, about the financial sector. I cannot disagree with Ilse, who said that something has been done. So why is the rating 3.1 and not 5? I think there are two reasons for this. So this is a very important matter. So it's actually 3.2 for the financial sector. So we have to look at what the investors see and what they know. So when we analyzed the data that we collected, we saw that investors were a little cautious, and they did not have a clear understanding of what is being done to improve the investment environment in Latvia. And when journalists ask me what I think is going on, I have to say that I don't know. I lack the information, we lack the communication. Obviously, you don't have to explain every single little step you take, but you have to give the necessary information to all of the stakeholders. Another thing that we found is, obviously, there are things that investors know, and what they do definitely know is that as a result of the activities taken in the financial sector, obviously, good work has been done, results will ensue, but many businesses are being sort of victimized by these activities. So proportionality is something that we have to speak about. So proportionality to ensure that these changes are not only effective but also proportional to the existing situation. I think this is something that really needs to be worked on. And the last thing that I'd like to mention, what we also began with, is with the human resources. This is an issue that will continue to be topical. Obviously, human resources is something that continues to be a very important issue. And one thing that we have not mentioned so far is that, first of all, the accessibility of labor, so unqualified labor. The good news here is that the market economy will solve this soon enough. We've seen economic growth for some time already, and during economic growth, demand for low qualified labor is very high. Foreign investors have been screaming for solutions for this for years. There was no reaction for a very long time, but it will be just naturally cleared up soon enough. Another issue is how much this costs to the GDP of Latvia, this lack of a proper response. But another thing that we have spoken at length about is how we're lacking professionals, how we're lacking digital skills, but we didn't touch upon an important issue for me as a representative of a university, is that who will actually educate these IT specialists? Who will educate this qualified labor force? And one important issue that the foreign investors have raised is that higher education is localized and very fragmented. I live here, my children live here, and I'm not really planning on leaving for any longer period of time. But this emphasis that the Latvian language will be killed off if we start producing study papers in English or provide education in English to ICT specialists. It seems like we're biting ourselves in the foot, or shooting ourselves in the foot. And for foreign investors, they have highlighted to us that with our nationalistic slogans, we're actually doing a disfavor to our national ambitions. And I think that this is something that we are slowly starting to realize, and that perhaps policymakers will implement positive changes in this regard. Well, I definitely agree that writing a dissertation in a foreign language will not be unbeneficial to our national interest. Well, in any case, the full text of the study is available on the Foreign Investors Council webpage, and we have coffee and pastries downstairs. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to all our participants, and goodbye.